Hey, family, this is Dr. Jamal Bryant. You are logged in on Let's Be Clear. I'm appreciative that you are a part of this amazing conversation that speaks to the heart and to the mind of what's taking place in our community. I am super excited for you to be able to lean in and hear the thoughts of our guest for today. He is a colleague, a comrade, and a friend who is really pioneering a space that is really reflective of the era and the time and the generation that we are part of. Ryan Wilson, the Gathering Spot, lawyer, CEO, maverick, outlier.
Very kind. I appreciate you.
No, I'm grateful to have you because this is global. Tell everybody what the Gathering Spot is.
So there's two ways to understand TGS. The first thing to understand, though, is that I'm in the people business more than anything else. We build physical locations, so each space has event space. We host everything. We have a restaurant, bar, and we have workspace. The thing, though, that I wake up every single day doing is connecting people. Youngest member is 21, oldest is 92.
Wow.
Entrepreneurs, creatives, small business owners all call the club home. And so we built our first club in Atlanta, but have gone on to build others in D.C., Los Angeles, and then I've got 5 cities where there are people, membership communities, and no space. So that's most of what happens at TGS. I mean, we're doing a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but it all centers around, again, community and people.
Yeah, the Gathering Spot by itself, in its name and its branding, I don't know what was your intention, is a revolutionary, defiant act for it to be launched in Atlanta when Georgia was the home of the Black Codes. From 1860 to 1875, it was illegal for more than 5 Black people to gather.
Absolutely.
Now you're putting us all at risk.
No, so, look, that history for me is not lost. Like, we're a part of that continuum and take very seriously, we have to have spaces where we can come together. And we have to be intentional when we get into those spaces. Yeah. So, look, at TGS, we will engage who you are professionally. We do a lot of events about what's happening in the workspace and what industries are emerging. But then we spend a lot of time socially, just getting to know one another. I believe that it has to be both, right? We have to have places where we can go back and forth between who we are as folks that are engaged in work,
right,
and people who just are engaged in everything else. So we do it all.
A true story. I just moved to Atlanta in December of 2018, and it was the very first time at the Gathering Spot that I ever met Stacey Abrams. Just walking around. It wasn't a reception. It wasn't a fundraiser. She was just there. As a matter of fact, she was in, I'm going to call it a podcast space. It may not have been that. She was in some space doing an interview in the back and came out. And I was new to Atlanta, and everybody like, do you know who this is? I was like, I have no clue who this is. But it just goes to show that anything can happen at the Gathering Spot.
We've had some weird days, right? Yeah. From truly having folks that are in elected office or seeking elected office, to artists, to small business owners that are there all at the same time, which again, to me, is a part of the magic. We oftentimes are told that, like, we're supposed to associate with one another in very specific ways, right? And so I went to law school immediately before starting TGS, and I was only hanging out with a bunch of lawyers.
Right.
And I just couldn't understand why that was, right? I needed to be in an environment where I was around artists, I was around entrepreneurs, I was around folks that work for some of the biggest companies in town, I was around folks that were in elected office or politicians. That's what we're striving to do every day. So it's T-shirts and jeans, sitting right next to suits and ties.
Right.
And my job every day is to try to figure out how to connect those dots.
I want to throw something in the water. Tomatoes are going to be thrown at the computer screen of those who are watching it. Kanye West did something critical a couple of years ago, is he shifted out of hip-hop community for 90 seconds and came over to gospel, did Sunday morning worship. There's a whole lot of WeWork spaces that happened that rose in the pandemic. Ryan, how is there no shared worship space? It's 1 million storefront churches that are barely holding on. They always got a crisis roof fund, HVAC, but a space really, and that question may even be for me,
I like that idea.
Yeah, for churches to be able to say, okay, 11-1 is Macedonia, 1-2 is St. John, 4-7 is St. Paul. But in that space where we're able to really cross-pollinate, because the most segregated community outside of black and white is the faith community. They just don't, there ain't no evening service no more.
Yeah.
There are no fellowship service. What has been the greatest obstacle for you in black people coming together?
We're taught a lot about not spending time together intentionally, right? It's something that really does have to be talked about, and you have to be intentional about. I think another thing that's working against us is that we think that we're doing the work online very often, right? So you'll have folks that'll say, well, we connected online, or I found you on this platform. It's getting folks to realize that, like, that's not the relationship, right? The relationship happens when we show up with one another,
right,
and do that very old school thing of just having a conversation, right? Like, we could do this on Zoom, but that's a very different experience online. So we've had to fight through, stuff that, again, isn't overly complicated.
Yeah.
But it is rewiring the way people think about relationship building, and knowing that, like, the only way for us to get there, and it doesn't matter really what we're talking about, is to be very focused on playing the long game with relationships.
Yes.
I think a lot of this stuff, too, is thought of as being happening overnight, where you show up and, we click and we're connected, and then, tomorrow we're going to go do the biggest deal of our lives together.
You're right.
It doesn't happen that way, right? So you may have to show up over and over and over again before that relationship really pays dividends, and that's okay. That's the way that it's supposed to happen.
My seminary professor, Dr. Sam Proctor, said the reason why we have fellowship is so that we know we ain't the only fellow on the ship. Somebody else is in it with us.
That's important, though. There's research out there that this is the loneliest time in recorded human history and in our existence.
Yeah.
People are reporting being more lonely right now, despite all the different ways that we can connect. So you have to be in places where you can see other folks and connect with them, right? There have been some solutions that have been built where you can see people, and I would argue that, like, that isn't the work. You really have to have an opportunity to engage, and that's not going to happen with you sitting at a computer screen or even just walking into rooms and looking around. I grew up in the church, and it was very interesting to me where you would have folks that would come every single week,
right,
but knew no one.
Yeah.
Because the relationship building happens outside. It happens in all the different meetings that happen throughout the week, right? You have to be a person that takes that sort of work seriously.
Here is the common denominator between my church in Baltimore and where I pastored New Birth here in Atlanta is a consistent theme of the brokenness and the deficiency of both churches. The church I pastored in Baltimore was a skating rink, and I rehabbed it and turned it into a sanctuary. Held 2,500 people. I moved to Atlanta, and sanctuary holds 7,000 people.
Yeah.
Ryan, here's the disconnect and the common denominator. Both churches, Atlanta and Baltimore, neither church had a kitchen. Neither church has a dining room. And I can see how it has impacted the church because there is no space to gather.
Yeah.
So at the benediction, they gone 30 seconds or less. They are out the door because there is no gathering spot. And when you go through the gospel, go through the Bible, it's centered around eating. Centered around the apple.
That's why we have a restaurant.
Supper, you got to get to that table.
That is the only reason why we have a restaurant.
Wow.
If you asked me to build a restaurant independently right now, I would not do it.
Yeah.
I only operate restaurants because it is a place where we can come and build and where it's common ground. Other than that, that's a very hard business, right, to be in. So we take very seriously that though we have to have it so that folks can come, sit, and be well taken care of, but also have a context to be able to invite people, to make sure that the meeting can continue, right? It does so much when folks are able to break bread.
You really went against the trends of what everybody was projecting in COVID. that we would never go back to work. We would never go back to church. We would never go back to the mall. That life would be completely different. And yet you stood fast and said, oh, no, they got to come. What did you see that CNN couldn't see?
Look, I'm. There are certain things that are just fundamental to me, and relationships are one of them. There's never been a time that I've studied where folks were not creating authentic relationships in order to move the needle on whatever it is that they were trying to do. And so I just couldn't imagine that world, right? And I'm seeing the research around loneliness and all the other things that were really not sustainable, right? Like we had to get to another place.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, part of the entire, it's almost been 9 years that we've been working on TGS. I always question who's writing these rules about how we're supposed to associate with one another. Do they ultimately serve me? And if they don't, we can head in a different direction, right? No one's creating these rules in a way that makes sense, right, to us. And if it doesn't, like, we're just gonna go on. And that's what we were saying during COVID. I mean, we expanded, right? When everyone was saying go home,
right?
We built a club in DC, and then we went on and built another one in the middle of the pandemic in LA. We introduced communities in New York, Chicago, Charlotte, Detroit, Houston, all at the same time, because I knew that we weren't always going to be able to stay in a mode of being locked in our houses. And we needed to be responsible at that time. We needed to protect one another. But there would be a day after, and we needed to be preparing for that day then. So
in light of that understanding, I was traveling somewhere. I don't even remember what city I was in. And Ryan, the Zoom headquarters was up for sale. So I said, well, if they Zoom, why do they need a meeting space? But you're seeing all of these office buildings now going up for sale. And yet you were saying that there is a gaping hole for socialization and connectivity, but people aren't coming to the office. So where is the middle?
Yeah, I think the office thing is shifting, right? I mean, I think a lot of companies saw that you could get work done without having folks in the office in the very traditional 9 to 5, long commute, right? So flexibility, even for our team, that's important to us. We've changed that way.
Yeah.
That to me is a different conversation, though, than do we need to know one another and how are we going to build those relationships discussion. Yeah. That's those two things don't tie. And it's going to be something that I think we're going to have to spend time talking about, even in the workplace, because one thing that I don't think is discussed enough, it is all well and good to be 100% remote and never see your team and never feel like you have to engage.
Right.
There will come a point, though, and there's research on this too, where when there's a decision about who's going to be promoted or there's a decision about who's going to get this opportunity or that one, those decisions are made off of who knows the people that are there and where there's relationship. Yeah. And so I'm concerned that we are overemphasizing the idea that we can get so much work done out of the office when, again, at the end of the day,
they don't even know you're on the team.
Out of sight, out of mind is a real thing.
Yeah.
Right. So if your boss's boss is only seeing your name on a spreadsheet and maybe occasionally as a box on a screen, right. I realistically, we can talk about the world as it should be, but the world as it is very difficult when a decision is being made for you to think about box 23 that you saw 3 months ago.
What then would you say when this is the largest surge of Black entrepreneurship that we have had in Americana history? Should entrepreneurs be looking for brick and mortar space, or should they occupy this virtual reality?
I think the answer is honestly right in the middle right now. Depending on what you're doing, it is important to have physical places, right, where the team can meet. A lot of entrepreneurship in the early days is about the team's camaraderie.
Right.
It is about how if you're all able to see a common vision and move towards it with the same force as the goal. I think it is very difficult to do. Not impossible, but it is very difficult to do that remote. But I'm glad you mentioned Black business. I mean, we are right now at a real inflection point, and I think that the discussion is going to have to change. When we started TGS, it felt like everybody was talking about start. And so you saw a lot of courses around the ABCs of entrepreneurship and the 1, 2, 3s. And look, we should still do that to a certain extent.
Or watch these keys.
Yeah, all those. I mean, we did it, right? But how I look at it is that, like any good ecosystem, there needs to be points of graduation. When you come into high school or college, freshman orientation is very different than the coursework of sophomore, junior, and senior year.
No doubt.
That has not happened as it relates to Black-owned companies. We are stuck with a freshman year conversation right now. And there's too many people who are very interested for some reason in just leaving us there when we have sophomores, we have juniors, we have seniors.
All right.
What I'm finding is that there isn't the appropriate level of coursework available, the ecosystem conversation available for folks once they mature, and it is leading our businesses to be too small.
Interject for me where in this landscape is the space for AI. Are we really avoiding that, or is it the inevitable? What is the impact? What's the train that's coming?
I do think we're in a paradigm shift, right? And look, in every couple of years, there's always a new technology or something that people get excited about.
Right.
And we've seen over the last couple of years varying degrees of impact depending on what tech we're talking about. AI is here to stay. It is going to fundamentally change the ways that we do a lot of things in business. With that said, I think the larger problem as it relates to Black folks in business is that we're starting companies in the wrong industries. We don't have enough Black-owned businesses that are starting in the industries of the future.
And what are those?
Things like AI and other emerging tech. Things like there's a lot of money that's being spent on the environment, and are we building companies that are doing clean tech, right? Ed tech, health tech. Those are industries right now where the capital is interested in additional investment. And look, I'm not interested in shaming anyone, and I truly believe that whatever your passion is, that is yours for a reason, right? So I'm not here to discourage you from it. But in the aggregate, we do not see enough of our businesses starting in the right categories. And so things like access to capital come up. Now, there are institutional barriers and unacceptable things happening that lead us to have very small percentages of the pie. Part of the problem, though, that we have to have some family business conversation on is that we're not starting enough businesses where there is interest in investing. Now, the same institutional barriers exist when you get there.
Right.
We still have to fight that fight. But if you asked me to give you a list of 50 Black folks that are starting companies leveraging AI right now, that would be a lot harder for me to do than if you asked me to give an example of Black folks that are starting CPG companies or people that are building products.
Right.
Again, no shame.
No, I get it.
But that is genuinely where we are going. That is absolutely where the money is lining up. And unfortunately, we are not in those conversations in the way that we need to be.
With the yin yang of both sides of this position, and I'm hopping the fence. Those of y'all watching, I'm walking the Cirque du Soleil tightrope. The number one entree for people in 2023 to meet new people is now online.
Mm-hmm.
So people say it's no longer from my friend or my fraternity, sorority, sister, or at the church. I'm online. But if I'm going to the computer to get connectivity, how is that then impacting relationships?
I think we've got
to gather.
I'm with you. Yeah. I think that we've got to look at the tech as a tool to introduce the conversation.
Yeah.
But what a lot of folks do once they see something online, they'll come to the thing in person, right? So we just can't give up on that part of the experience. The model has shifted. It used to be do it in person, put it online, hope folks see it. We are moving into a world where folks may see it online first, and then we've got to get them into in person. But like, we cannot give up on the idea that people are interested in that.
Yeah.
There's a reason why folks are still showing up to the church every Sunday morning. In theory, or you take that principle to its maximum, everybody could just stay at home every Sunday morning.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen though, because there are additional benefits that show up when you're in person. And I think over time, going back to the businesses that we're starting, more solutions that can be built to close this gap. We've got to be building them though.
No, that's great. In the pandemic, I believed, now falsely, that the next generation of those who are coming through in ministry would not get buildings. They would just start online. Now I'm finding out that that is completely flawed and false. I went through Lenox yesterday, and it was a ghost town. I mean, you could park anywhere at an angle. Not bump into anybody in the food court. And Amazon is jumping. And Walmart just announced that they're going to close, I think, 700 stores nationwide. And so it's a double dutch. It's winning in some places, it's missing in the other one. And so those who are now emerging in the generation, how can you tell? Online, in person, online, in person.
This to me goes back to industry fit and understanding what the trends are in the industry. All right. So in retail, if you're trying to start a clothing company right now, it's a very difficult season to go build brick and mortar and have folks come to your store. A lot of e-commerce has shifted
I never
online.
even bought any clothes at all online until the pandemic.
And that high number of people have said that, especially since the pandemic. I don't even know what the clothing store looks like. Right. So thing to know, right? But at the same time, that does not mean, I think sometimes we will see one principle and then think that it applies to everything. So it does apply to retail. Retail's been under pressure though for most of my life at this point. There have been changes to the importance of the mall changed drastically since I was born. I mean, the mall used to be the place.
Oh, Saturday. Listen, meet me there.
You didn't even have to have. There was nothing to do. Just go.
We're going to walk around.
Folks don't organize in that way, but that is not the same comment as that they're not organizing at all. People are still together. I mean, that was half the challenge. If you really look at the pandemic, that was half the challenge of the pandemic, is that folks were unwilling to not be around one another, right? So if we accept that as truth, we have to know that there are things that we can still be building. We have to just be there, right? Again, it's very important for me. I do not want anybody to feel scared or ashamed or anything connected to what they're building. But we over-index on having too many companies in too few industries where margins are low and growth is low. We have to simply start to redirect that energy to where there are higher margins and higher growth potential, and it's 100% possible to do it.
What do you think is the future of the gathering spot?
So a lot of what we're talking about are things that I'm thinking about, right? And not as the end point, but as how do you figure out ways to be more helpful to people? I've been having this conversation with folks in our community where, so if you look in Atlanta, there's 5,000 members of the club. If you imagine the answer to most questions that we would ask, the answer probably exists in the membership statistically.
Wow.
We have 5,000 folks that are well networked and have their own networks of people that they understand and know about what's going on. I've got to figure out how to make sure that information is more accessible. So back in the day, you would show up and a person would give you a binder and it would have the headshot and name and title of everyone.
Right.
Technology allows us to start to ask different questions. Well, okay, we have everybody's picture and name and title. How do we start to how can you ask a very specific question about what you need? And I'm able to get that information from the membership to you in real time. That's where we're focused right now because it exists. It's there every single day, but I don't care if you need a babysitter or if you're trying to find an investor, a business partner, or your next job. It likely exists at TGS at this point. And we need to have technology available to be able to do it.
I want to jump into my orbit and say that is probably the missing integer for the Black church. Is that years ago, Bishop Long, when he was alive, did a I'm going to call Black Pages of all of the businesses that were in the church. You need a plumber, call Brother Johnson. you need a pound cake, call Sister Williston.
Absolutely.
And go forward. But we're not really, and again, I'm going to blame the fact that we don't have a kitchen, that there is not a space for us to really cross-pollinate and find out what is happening and how do we really put our grasp around it.
I think for any community-based group, this should be the question that everyone is starting to analyze. How do we better connect folks and better utilize the data that does exist to help people, right? So if you need a plumber and you're at the church, you should be able to go somewhere and say, I'm looking for everybody that's a part of this ministry that could help me solve this problem.
Yeah.
And that data comes together to give you an answer. I think that's where everybody's going. So it's not just TGS.
Yeah.
This is going to be the thing that folks are asking for on a regular basis. And the technology, fortunately, is there. So we're not actually dreaming something that can't happen.
Yeah.
We got to go build it. And this gets back to my central point here. Those are the sort of businesses that we need people to be spending their time building respectfully.
Yeah.
And not a lot of this other stuff that we see very often.
At the end of the day, I am hypothetically a new person who has just moved to Atlanta from Greensboro, North Carolina. And I have the luxury and the blessing of being able to work at home. Mm-hmm. Once I get in there, I think, Ryan, a whole lot of us have a undocumented anti-personality disorder because of social media. I mean, so it's always keep your head down and get your work done. How are you fostering people to get out of the comfortability of self to take the risk to say, I have no idea what this guy does? How do I strike up that conversation without being weird or looking like a stalker? We almost need a post-pandemic re-socialization of the culture.
I totally agree. And I think the first thing we need to do is remind folks that it is important to be helpful, right, to people, right? As basic as that sounds, it is very important for you. And one of my goals, you're either going to show up positively or negatively in everyone's story.
That's true.
You should hope to show up positively, right? And so when a person asks you, hey, I'm working on this, and do you like it? Try to give them something that will help them move the needle. If folks just entered the conversation with that energy, entered it in love, again, these are very basic concepts, but we would be in a much different place. Yeah. I'm an introvert by nature. It's funny that I own and operate social clubs because it's against naturally who I am.
Yeah.
But the thing that deeply inspires me every day is that I have watched people meet their business partner. I've watched them meet investors. I'm going to a gathering spot wedding in a couple of weeks.
Wow.
I have seen people develop real relationships that ordinarily wouldn't have met. So we have to push past that.
Yeah.
Last thing I'll say is that you have to celebrate when we see examples of when it's worked. We've got to show people that this is the model, right? And again, we're not creating anything new here. We've been doing this connection thing for a long time.
Yeah.
It's our responsibility now to take it more seriously, know that the pandemic changed a lot of the ways that we associate with one another.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we cannot believe that it's possible to accomplish all that we want to accomplish in isolation. There's actually no documentation ever that folks have been able to accomplish major works sitting by themselves. So we've got to lean on one another. And the issues that we are facing as a community right now require a different level of engagement than us passively sitting in our homes hoping that it all works out.
Well, what is a greater contributor to anxiety? Being by myself or being in a room with people who I don't know? And that's rhetorical, but everybody wrestles with, man, am I going to speak? I don't want her to think I'm trying to holler. You got all of those different dynamics.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've tried to prioritize over the last, certainly this year, is being very transparent. What I find is that when you can just share with folks exactly where you are, it allows them to see we're normally in the exact same place, or if I'm not there right now, I used to be there. And if I'm not there, I know somebody that is.
Right.
it's opened so many doors just saying, hey, look, I don't know what that means. I am curious about that as well. I mean, and we do it across the board, right?
Absolutely.
From folks that are talking about food and beverage.
Yes.
And like, I remember sitting with a member and she was telling me, look, I go to all of these dinner parties with folks at my firm. She's a lawyer. And they're always smelling and slurping and analyzing the wine. I don't know what that means.
Right.
And so I said, you know what? I don't either. And we built a course to bring people together to ask the very basic questions about. So just having authentic discussions with people
will birth it.
Allows us to say, most of us don't know most of this stuff. And for those of us that have figured out a little bit of something, it's our responsibility to turn around and tell everybody else about it.
Yeah, it is a now unpublished, it's no longer published, an old book called The Art of Conversation. And people don't know how to dialogue just like they don't know how to write in cursive.
Absolutely.
So it's got to be more than where you from, how old are you, and what's your favorite color, where we eating after this. Is really getting to the heart of where people are that comes out of subtle conversation.
Ask people how you can be helpful. Ask them, all of those, what's your name, title, those questions don't help move the needle at all. But when you ask a person why, a lot of times, just why, if you spend most of the discussion just saying, that's very interesting, why did you do that? And then they'll give you an answer, and you say, well, why did you do that?
Right.
You'll get to an understanding about who that person is. Yeah. But then beyond that, you'll leave having learned a lot more than you would have if you would have asked them about the weather.
Bishop Walter Thomas said he changed what you just said in terms of how can I help, and started saying, how can I assist what you're doing?
Mm-hmm.
Because it gets them involved.
Absolutely.
Without them throwing the heft of the weight of the responsibility on pay my rent. No.
I think another easy one, another real easy one, is ask folks how they are and actually listen to the answers to that question.
Wow.
Most people do not actually, we do it all the time. How you doing? Good.
Yes.
Nobody learns anything.
Yeah.
So I think there's two things that you have to do. One, ask the question genuinely. Listen to the response. And give a real answer if you're asked that question. Yeah. If you're constantly the person that just says, okay, good.
Yeah.
You're nothing is learned in that discussion. Everybody assumes everybody's all right. And what I can't stand, again, this goes back to we're the loneliest generation ever.
Yeah.
We've got to really take a moment to say, no, like, how are you doing?
Yeah, really.
And how are you really doing?
Yeah.
And again, you have a responsibility, if you know, especially if you know the person, answer that question. If the answer is okay, tell people okay. Don't say good if it's not good.
Yeah.
That has opened so many doors with my friends. Just when this is a real check-in. This isn't the drive-by version of this. We're going to really see where everybody is. We haven't talked about anything earth-shattering here. This is groundbreaking, but it's the fundamental stuff that I think that we're forgetting.
Yeah.
That are the things that help make a difference.
Part of the deformity of social media is one of two. One, people only post their highlight footage.
Yes, not right.
And never the tackles. Yeah. Number two is people are more prone to post it to strangers than they are to share it with people who are in their intimate circle.
Can I add a third one?
Please.
Third one for me is that we have a lot of folks online right now that are talking about things that they have not yet experienced. And it is leading people to believe that there are accomplishments that exist that have not happened.
Yeah, that's not true.
And that is we're in a very dangerous spot with that, right? There's such a thing as expertise. There are people who've spent their lives
that's right.
really concentrated on trying to make sure that they understand and can tell people about something.
Yeah.
And we've got a lot of people right now that are making a lot of other people feel terrible about where they are, and they haven't done the work. I mean, especially in Atlanta, so many real estate professionals that have never bought or sold anything.
No.
Finance gurus that have never been involved in a transaction.
Listen.
It's unacceptable.
And John O'Brien was here a couple of weeks ago. He said they become rich teaching you how to become rich. They don't have any businesses. They don't have any real estate.
These are conversations that we have to have in love. Yeah. I mean, I'm sorry, but it is a big threat to folks' self-esteem when you go online and it feels like everybody who just turned 27 became a millionaire.
Yeah.
When statistically we know that that's, one, not true.
Yeah.
Not impossible, but not true.
Right.
And two, most of the people that are talking about this lifestyle have never actually accomplished not even a version of it.
Right.
Now, there's a small select few that have actually become wealthy, and look, it's tough for me, right? I'm never rooting against anybody who's trying to do something in business, but when you're talking to folks that you know don't know, and intentionally selling them something that you know they haven't had the opportunity to get other perspectives on, and that you yourself don't have expertise in, that is something that needs to be called what it is. It's shameful, right? And it needs to be stopped, right? I mean, we have there's a lot of conversation about black jobs recently. We got a lot of black folks that have a lot of great black jobs.
Yeah.
We need to be profiling and highlighting people that have expertise.
Yeah.
In their absence.
Agreed.
We got a bunch of folks that are trying to stand in that gap that are harming us. It's beyond just just another voice that's a part of the conversation.
Yeah.
And in many instances, they're dominating the conversation. And you gotta start to look at some of the fundamentals of this. If you're a millionaire, why are you selling me coursework for $12? Just the fundamentals of that just don't really, the economics don't make sense.
No, that's great. I want to ask you, as a pastor to a businessman, one of the hardest things my staff has to get me to do, and I go down kicking and screaming, is I don't like selling tickets for anything. Tell me what, if any, has been an obstacle on selling memberships to a community who subconsciously believes it should be free.
Yeah,
if you really for the community.
Yeah. Look, so I'm one of those folks. I'm unapologetic about the fact that in order for our stuff to start, but more importantly to scale, there has to be money that's a part of. There has to be an exchange at some point. Now, we have a responsibility as a business to deliver a good service. We have to do the things that we said we were going to do. But when we do, it is important for us to be able to go, and I've got to resource my team. I've got 100+ folks on our team.
Wow.
That's real rent. That's real groceries that happen every single month.
Yeah.
And so I can say with confidence in our situation, as a member of this community, your contribution, your investment in the business, it is not something that's going to waste. And so I try to have this conversation just like this. Look, I'm not going to take advantage of anybody, but in order for me to make this work, it has to work, right? Like the things that we have to care for, which at this point are more and more significant. I've got to have a path to get there. If you're in business right now, please do not allow folks to make you feel sad about the idea that you're in business to be in business. One other thing that I practice is that I don't accept gifts. If you have a thing, I don't care what it is. If it's a candle or it doesn't matter. We can talk about any product. I pay for it, right? Because it took that entrepreneur some resources to make it. And while I appreciate the gesture,
that's great.
If I have the capacity to pay for it,
I got it.
Even if I take yours, I'm gonna go buy a couple more to make sure that we continue to keep the flow, because our businesses have to scale.
No,
I mean they just do, and they're not gonna scale by us bartering with one another to infinity.
Exchanging Christmas gifts.
It's just not gonna get there. I mean, 96% of our companies don't employ anybody, right? And so we've got to start with understanding that, like, of the 4% that do, we can't be accepting free things from those companies. We need to be very passionate about saying, I'm very excited to see location number 1. I'm going to be there for number 2. I'm going to tell folks about number 3. I want this thing to get to its highest heights.
No, it's good.
Not to be here super excited about getting what I can get for free here. So I believe that's our tradition. I believe that's where we come from in this, and that's where we have to stay rooted.
I want to go backwards and go far afield for a moment. You are the survivor, and it's not that many. You're a survivor in a small fraternity of those who've come through almost black-on-black crime. No, no Smith & Wesson was involved.
No.
But all of Atlanta was in a collective asthma attack, watching unfold a harrowing event that really, it was somewhere between the Lifetime channel and Bravo to see what is happening. And one, before you respond, I want to thank you that in spite, obviously it worked out, but that it hadn't turned your heart around doing business with our people. So I want to thank, because it could have come out bloodied a whole lot more than that. But and you don't need to go into details, but the reason why I bring it up, it is only in our community that somebody will have a bad experience with a black contractor and say, this is why I don't do business with black people. And you have never heard a Chinese person walk out of a Chinese restaurant, I ain't never eating Chinese again. We will swear off all of our people over one incident. I want you to talk about your resolve.
Well, look, this is a topic that's really important to me because to this point around transparency, we've got to have real discussions.
Yeah.
Very difficult season that we personally and professionally went through. Only reason why I'm having this conversation with you now in this role, in this title that I'm renting, is because the community made it possible. The community's voice made our engagement. That's the only reason why we're having the discussion the way that we are. To your point around, there's kind of two sides of this coin to me. On one side, there's a conversation around accountability. And I think as business owners, it is our responsibility to be accountable to our teams and to our stakeholders. It is also important for us as business owners to make sure that for anybody that's engaging with us, that we respect the fact that folks are working hard for their money.
Yeah.
And they do not have to spend it with us. Now, on the other side of that coin, as consumers, as people that are participating, I agree with you. We absolutely have to change the way that we engage and think about what accountability looks like. Oftentimes, it is way too much online. It is way too sometimes it's not even tied to a set of facts that in and of itself is that egregious. I mean, folks will wait 5 minutes longer for a food order than they thought they should and go live from the place saying, I can't believe I'm here.
With a
that does not
fork eating in my car.
Yeah, that is not support.
Yeah,
it just isn't, right? And it's something that I'm nervous about because it does take people's heart out of the game. Where, in addition to all the wars that you fight as a business owner, you're constantly scared that you'll have an interaction that you did not even intend to have.
Wow.
And be in a situation where you could lose your whole business because the online mob decided to take you out.
Crucify him. Yeah.
When if we're being fair, I don't know about you, but like my bag has been lost at the airport a couple, 2, 3, 10 times.
I'm still catching a plane Friday.
I'll be right back with them, right? And so if we're going to do it, the same energy that we give to many businesses, and this is the thing that I think it also has to be addressed. There are instances in every community where a business just simply will not treat you right. When that happens, you are entitled to however you feel about it.
Right.
But engage everyone equally in what that looks like.
That's right.
And if we're being fair, it does not happen that way.
No.
Folks do not have that same energy when they go out and engage companies. And this is also what's fascinating. Companies that are known for treating us terribly, we don't have any of that same sort of energy for.
No.
But if it's a black-owned business,
listen.
And
you only get one shot. It's 8 Mile with Eminem. It's it.
And then some of the language too that shows up is like, I was trying to support you. Were you trying to support the Fortune 5 companies that you do business with on a regular basis?
I tell people all the time, nobody ever walks out of Macy's and say, I wonder what kind of car the CEO drives.
Or, I was here to support Macy's, right? Like, how dare you do this to me? I was here to support you. We just say, I was here to buy this thing, and I don't like how this interaction happened.
Right.
And that's the worst case that we get. The burn down of Macy's doesn't happen. And again, we have to ask ourselves why. But more importantly, when you see someone else that that's engaging like that, tap them on the shoulder and ask them, is that necessary in this occasion? Because at the end of the day, we have to see our businesses more successful. And there are a lot of things that make it very difficult, right? A lot of our conversations around customer service.
Spin the bottle, pick one.
Customer service is about resources.
Yeah.
It is. And so if we understand that it is very difficult to accumulate the resources necessary to scale a business, then we also should understand that it's hard to go put 10 people in front of it. I'm not trying to make excuses for anybody, but the realities of what it takes to be in business. If the business owner could afford to have 10 folks, there's a very big difference between small business and big business. Mm-hmm. And the things that small businesses are dealing, I'm talking about businesses that make less than $1 million in revenue a year. Resources are tight. That is a very different circumstance than the Fortune 5 company that you're dealing with that has billions to go and address whatever your problem is.
No, serious. I wanted to say something because when you deal with wealth or you deal with faith, you always hear terminology on generational curses or generational wealth. Very rarely do we talk about generational relationships. And I bring that to bear. A couple of months ago, I went to your dad's book signing and to hear him talk about the story of hearing my dad and what that meant for his life. And then for a second generation, how to come through and to be in this space is really intentional, that we are raising children who understand the benefit of relationship. Yeah. We just talked about growing up, we go to the mall. 3 years prior to that, we had our crew and we riding on bikes. Yeah. Now you can't get teenagers to come out the room. Yep. Yeah, they on video games all day, on social media all day. I want you to say a word on what it means to really foster relationships early in the next generation that's coming.
Look, it's very difficult to build a relationship in wartime. It's much easier to do it when there's peace. And growing up, for most folks, right, for a lot of people, that's a time where there's less responsibility, where you've got more time to think about how you're going to think about what's next for you. Go meet and talk to and try to engage with as many folks as you can. I was talking to some young folks that were at the gathering spot a couple weeks ago, and I said, look, everybody remembers that person that they couldn't stand in 7th grade.
Vividly.
And what's sad about it,
first
last name, and on site, they could walk in as an adult, and you would still be like, in 7th grade.
That was Patrick Henderson.
Like, I can't stand you. Right. That should show us something about relationships. Yeah. People grow and evolve and change. That's true.
Yeah.
But people remember how you showed up when they met you. Yeah. And 20 years later, you could walk through the door, and they'll be like, I couldn't stand you 20 years ago. Yeah. And I'm not sure if I can stand you right now.
But all the more, we know why we couldn't stand you.
And that thing doesn't move. So from a relationship standpoint, it is never too early to show folks who you are and to invest in getting to know people, because the same thing I said about a negative experience also happens when there's a positive experience with people.
No, that's great.
You'll be 20 years later, whole different set of circumstances in your life, but folks will be like, I remember how you showed up in high school.
Listen.
You were nice to me. When I was sitting by myself, you were the person that told me to come sit over here. Now, I don't know what you're doing right now, but like, you were cool then. So I'm going to imagine that those same values have continued. And I'd like to figure out how to do something. It matters right now. There's so many, I always pick on the person. We invite students to TGS on a regular basis. I always pick on the kids that are too cool for the conversation, that act like they're asleep and can't. And I give them this example. Folks will remember the person that was engaged, and they will remember the person that was asleep.
Listen.
It's not that hard to be the person that shows up positively in a person's story. So invest in that process right now. I still get folks from high school, again, very different circumstances now, decades later.
Yeah, right.
But we were cool then.
Right.
So somehow we are cool right now. And that's relationship.
My favorite story to that is LeBron James was picked on in 7th grade. He had run over tennis shoes, being raised by a single mother, father's nowhere around, and one boy in the class defended him, stuck with him. And a few years ago, that same guy filed bankruptcy, lost everything in divorce. That guy is half the size of LeBron James, half his weight. He looked like he works at the gathering spot. And he is LeBron James's bodyguard, who is making Ryan $1.5 million a year when he has no security background. He didn't own a firearm until LeBron picked him up, but he said, I remember how you defended me.
Remember how you showed up?
I remember how you showed up.
Yep. No,
it's the least that I can do.
Well, if you notice what we didn't talk about, we didn't talk about how smart you were. We didn't talk about how there were no other variables. People remember how you made them feel.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, the more people, right, and this can't be transactional. It can't be fake. Like, no phony. Like, if you genuinely show up positively in folks' lives, that is what people remember, especially in wartime. People call when it gets tight.
Yeah.
When you really need someone to give you some security.
Yeah.
You're not gonna go to a stranger or to some person that you need to go.
You remember who called you when your mama died. And you remember who didn't show up.
Exactly. And I really think that is a very simple principle that unfortunately too many, yes, younger folks, but I would argue people at this point are not taking seriously that, like, it does matter the messages that you send. I mean, that handwritten notes and people just sending little check-ins.
Listen.
Those things are the difference maker. And you're in a career, and I would say in a life.
Oh, that's great. 20 years from now, I am going to remember I sat down with the founder of the Gathering Spot.
I appreciate that, but I mean, even the story that you referenced where you showed up for my dad's book talk.
Yeah.
20 years from now, I will remember with all the travel and all the responsibilities that you had, that you drove way north to come to that experience that you did not have to.
Yes.
Right. It is how you show up, how you make people feel.
Yes.
That makes the difference. And again, I try to make things in my life, at least, as simple as I possibly can make them.
Yeah,
this is a simple one.
Yes, I don't want to keep going around it, but let me, for you to understand the gravity of relationship. My dad was supposed to be there for his book signing, and my mother fell sick. And at the last, I want to say 24 hours before, maybe 48 hours before, he said that he couldn't make it. So I said, Dad, I'm going to be there. So when I get there, your dad's like, wow, I thought you were going to be in Baltimore somewhere.
Yeah.
But the small things matter. Maya Angelou's favorite quote, people won't remember what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel.
Absolutely. It is a thing that cannot be lost, and it is a thing that will get you through so many different, look, I mean, I've got a business called The Gathering Spot.
Yeah.
And truly, I was watching the news, and they said, don't gather. And I remember I called my mother. This was like, my wife was 36 weeks pregnant with our first child.
Yeah.
Our business closed.
Wow.
We had the lowest attrition that we've ever had in the business's history in that season. 98% of the membership kept their membership. It's a relationship. We absolutely should have gone
under.
Immediately. Every event we had on the books was gone. Everything that we were planning was over with. It is only because good people and the fact that we knew those people said, hey, we're not going to allow this business to fail.
Yeah.
I cannot come to physically utilize it.
But I'm with it.
But I'm going to make sure that it makes it through. And remember, at that time, it's easy now in hindsight. We knew pandemic has a time period to it.
Yeah.
But in March of 2020, folks were talking about this thing going on we didn't know, right? Folks were signing up to go on that journey with us for the long run. And it's something that, one, I'll never be able to repay, but speaks to this idea that I was calling. Our first act as a business, we called every single person and told them where we were, asked them how they were doing, asked them if we could help, anything that was going on in their business, and we weathered that storm together.
That's beautiful. I said, pray that you will stay locked and loaded to the Jamal Bryant Podcast. Let's be clear. Every week, I want to build relationship with you. I want to do life with you. I want to have conversations with you that's going to help your life, not just for you to be entertained, but for you to be equipped, for you to be empowered, for you to be inspired. Do me a favor, build your relationship and send this conversation to friends of yours and make sure you follow, you like, and you share. I'll see you next time.